So where do we ever use rational numbers in the real world? Well, here's a prime example of where you would use rational numbers, working with decimals in this case. If you ever have a savings account or a checking account, this is probably more applies to a checking account, just because you tend to have more transactions in that. You are constantly adding numbers when you deposit money and subtracting numbers when you take out money or you write a check. So this is an example of where you'll use rational numbers in the real world. This is in your journal book. It's activity 3. So I would like you to work through activity 3 and find out what your final answer is and check with me. So the way that you're going to do that is, if you notice here, they tell me that the red numbers are amounts that are taken from, so those are subtracting. So here, if I want to start out, I start out with $100, and I'm going to subtract $34.57 because I wrote a check for groceries for that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and subtract like I normally would. So 10 minus 7 is 3, 4, bring my decimal down, 5, 6. So I get 65.43 for my balance here. Okay, then I just got paid, looks like a paycheck. So I deposited a check for $875.50. Black numbers tell me that they're added. So I'm going to add that $875.50, and I'm lining up at the decimal. So I end up with $940.93. Okay, so at the end of January 6th, I had $940.93. So you're going to continue in that manner, adding and subtracting as you get to each number, until you see what your final balance is on the 22nd of January. So go through, finish out that process, and then check back with me to see what your final answer should be. Okay, so before we get started in on rational numbers and adding and subtracting, I want to review with you really quick the rules for when we add and subtract integers. Whoops, let's do a minus 17. Okay, so here I've got, when we worked with adding and subtracting integers, we always looked at the symbols first. Those are different. So we found the difference. So in our head, we would think 17 minus 10, which would give us 7. And then we're going to apply the larger numbers sign. So 17 is considered larger when you just compare the digits. It had a negative sign. So our answer would be -7. Okay, if we had numbers that had the same symbol, so let's say this time I did -10 and a -17. Okay, I look at the symbols, they're the same, so I find the sum. So the sum is to add, so 10 plus 17 is 27, and then I'm going to apply the same symbol. So I'm going to add a negative sign in front because we apply the same symbol, so we get -27. We're going to use those concepts today, only today we're going to work with fractions and decimals. Okay, so the key thing to remember when working with decimals is you must line up at the decimal point. It's also very good practice to take the bigger digit and always have that as your top number. Whether it's a positive or a negative, it doesn't matter. Whether you're adding or subtracting, it's just good practice to have the bigger digit without the symbols as your top number. So here, when I look at these, before I decide if I'm going to add or subtract, I'm just going to compare these numbers, not paying attention to the symbol in front. So when I look at them, I would say 7.62 is the bigger number. So I'm going to write that as my top number. And then I've got 4.05. Notice how I am lining up at the decimal place. Okay, so this is where my decimal is going to be. Okay, so now I need to decide, am I going to add or subtract? So that's where we go ahead and we look at our symbols that are in the front. Are they the same or different? Those are different. So we're going to find the difference, which means we're going to subtract. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to subtract this out. So I can't do 2 minus 5, so I'll borrow. 12 minus 5 gives me 7. 5 minus 0 is a 5. 7 minus 4 is 3. So we get 3.57. Now I have to decide if it's positive or negative. So since I already declared that this was the bigger number without looking at the symbols, I'm going to look at the symbol in front of that, and it was a positive symbol. So our answer ends up being a positive 3.57. Okay, so let's try another one. Okay, so bigger digit. We're just looking at the digits, not paying attention to the symbols in front. I'm saying the 2.75. So I'm going to go ahead and write that as my top number. And then 0.65 is going to be underneath. Now I'm going to decide if I'm going to add or subtract. So I'm going to look at the symbols in front. No symbol means it's a positive. So this is a positive versus a negative. Okay, this is really canceled out. It's not telling me whether I'm adding or subtracting. So I have a positive and I have a negative. Those are different. I'm going to find the difference. So I'm going to subtract. So I get 2.10. Now I have to decide if it's positive or negative. So I already said this is the bigger number. It had a negative sign, so my answer is negative 2.1. Okay, we take that extra zero off. It's called an extraneous zero, which means we don't need it at the end. If we were working money, yes, you would leave the zero, but anything beyond that, you're not going to leave the zero. Okay, so when I just compare these, which is bigger, 8.15 or 4.3, well, 8.15 is, so I'm going to put that as my top number, just in case I have to subtract. Line up my decimals. I see I've got one spot there with nothing. I'm going to put a zero in there. Now I'm going to look at my symbols. Those are the same, so I'm going to find the sum. We're going to add these together this time. So I get 12.45. Same symbol, find the sum, apply the same symbol. They were both negatives. My final answer should be negative 12.45. Okay, so I'm going to pull one out here for you guys to try on your own. So you've got negative 12.5 and a positive 15.3. So go ahead and pause your video and work your way through this problem and then check back in a minute to see if you got your answer correct. You should have gotten a positive 2.8 on this one. Okay, so that's working with decimals. So the key thing with decimals is making sure that we line up at the decimal place. Okay, so now we're going to work through fractions. And I will tell you, yes, you can use the crisscross method on this, but the one downfall to that is sometimes you could have a smaller number, so you have to be comfortable with reducing if you're choosing the crisscross method. So today I'm going to work with common denominators when I can. And when can I decide when I can and when it might be easier to just do the crisscross? Well, I always check first. The first thing I will always look at is I will always say, will my smaller number go into my bigger number on the bottom? And when I look at that and I say, will 3 go into 6? I say, yes, it will. It'll go in there twice. So that means I could take this times 2 to make it a 6. So this is working common denominator method. So whatever I did there, I'm going to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite these. So right now I have a negative 16 over 6, and I have a positive 5 over 6. Okay, now that we have the common denominator, here's what I want you to look at. I want you to just, I know in the end, at least unless I have to reduce, it's going to be over 6. I want you to now just look at your top digits and think of them back when we were working with integers. So think of it as negative 16 and a positive 5. Those are different symbols. I'm going to find the difference, which would be 11, and I'm going to apply the larger sign. So 16 is a larger digit. It has a negative sign. I get negative 11.6. That as a mixed number, if you want to change it to a mixed number, would be negative 1, which puts me at 6. I have 5 more to get to 11, and it's still going to be over 6. So either of these answers at this point are acceptable. We're going to work in the future more with converting between improper and mixed numbers. Okay, so let's try another one. And if you like the crisscross method, you can use that. But I will tell you right now that on the ones that we're practicing right now, it's probably one of the numbers is already in the form that you need it. Okay, so when I look at this one, the first thing I'm going to just ask myself comparing these two, will 4 go into 8? Yes, right? So it'll go in there twice. So I'm going to go ahead and do a common denominator on this one. Okay, so I end up with negative 7 over 8. And we have a positive 1 times 2 is 2 over 8. So I know for now, at least, my bottom number is 8. And now let's just look at the top numbers and not worry about the bottom. So I have a negative 7 and a positive 2. Those are different symbols. Find the difference. 5, apply the larger digit sign. So that would be -5/8. I want you guys to try this one. I'll help you get it set up because here we're working with a whole number. So when you set this up, this 2 is really 2/1 because we are working fractions. And then we have plus a -7/2. So I'm just going to do -7/2. Okay, this is a positive versus a negative. Okay, so now you're going to either have to go through find a common denominator or you're going to use your crisscross method and you're going to find what your final answer is here. Here I'm seeing when I look at the fractions, I see a positive and a negative. Those are different, so I'm going to find the difference. So go ahead and pause your video and work through this one and then check back in a minute to see if you got the answer correct. You should have gotten -3/2 or -1/2. Okay, so let's go through and work some other ones where they actually call them subtraction. It doesn't mean you're always subtracting. But here's a sample of when we've got subtraction. So jumping back into chapter 1, remember when we had 2 negatives next to each other? We went through and could make a plus sign unless it was through absolute value. So here this becomes 1/3 and we're going to do a plus sign and then 1/3. Nice thing is we already have a common denominator, so we're just going to add straight across. 1 plus 1 gives me 2/3. Okay, those were both positives, so that's not anything new compared to what you used to do with fractions. Remember, it's when they throw in those negatives that you have to do all of your thinking. Okay, here we have a mixed number. So I like to, because if I end up subtracting, I like to work improper fractions versus converting and then having to borrow and things like that. So when I go through to do this, I like to change these improper. So 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 would give me 10/3, and that's a negative, and then I have a -5/6. Okay, so if you want to use the crisscross method, you may. I'm looking at this right now and looking at my symbols so that in my head I'm saying, am I going to end up adding or subtracting? I can see right now I'm going to add, and I know that my answer in the end is going to be a negative answer. Now, because I'm okay with common denominators, I'm looking at this and saying, will 3 go into 6? Yes, it will. It'll go in there twice. Okay, so whatever I did to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So now I have -20/6 minus 5/6. That one's not going to change. I know the bottom number is going to be 6. And now a negative and a negative, those are the same symbol. I'm going to find the sum. So 20 and 5 is 25. So I get -25/6, or that would change into -4, which would put me at 24. Need one more to get to 25/6. So it's either -25/6 or -4 1/6. Okay, so I want you to try this next one. Okay, so you may need to change these improper. I'm noticing one is positive and one is negative, so you're going to be doing some subtraction between these. Okay, so you may have to reverse them around, or if you change them improper, then you can just think of your top numbers as if they're integers. So go through, pause your video, and work through this one. Remember, you either need to do common denominators or the crisscross straight across method. You should have gotten -3/4 for this answer. Okay. Fractions and decimals, so working those rational numbers, it's kind of complex, so be patient with yourself. Don't get frustrated, just keep plugging away at them. Fractions are going to be probably a little more frustrating than decimals. Key thing is that you just keep working at them. Okay, they will get easier the more comfortable you get with them. Good luck with these, you guys.